17 years ago, at this very moment, in the fullness of an uncertain DC spring, just like this one, I had a 3-month-old baby. And I was just heading back at that time to the pulpit of the congregation that I served as their minister after those 12 simultaneously incredibly short and incredibly long weeks of parental leave. You know how that works. That child, her name's Ruth, she is driving now. She and her little brother, who's only 12, are fully, both of them, entirely taller than me. And those two children are busy all the time, teaching me things about courage and about weird Gen Z movies I don't understand, and about how hopelessly strange I am. They're also always busy providing me with the memory of what it felt like, at least in those brief weeks after each of them were born, to live inside time in a fundamentally different way. Now, prior to becoming a parent, I had a whole lot of ideas. I had imagined that with a tiny newborn, I would spend the first couple of months mostly watching this cherubic little creature sleep while I read lots and lots of fabulous books that would in turn trickle down into fabulous, intelligent anecdotes and thought-provoking illustrations, which would in turn become sermons like this one. Now, not so much, it turns out. For all the reasons which do not bear repeating on account of the fact they are so glaringly obvious, I do not remember one single thing I read in those days. But I do remember how I felt. I remember all the long walks, half asleep, standing, because to ever stop, let alone sit down, would be to wake the baby. I remember the safety pin on one shoulder of my nursing top to remind me which side to start on next. That's a free tip from Reverend Nancy. I remember little hands and little faces, and most of all, I remember the not altogether unpleasant sense day after day that I was somehow moving through space that was thicker than air. That the world itself was slower. Viscous is the word that comes to mind, but not in the sort of gross way that it sounds, just thicker, slower, gravitationally different somehow, or at least sometimes slower, hurrying up and waiting, doing, not just because it was on my to-do list, but because this small human's needs dictated it. In truth, those early weeks of parenthood, they reminded me nothing so much as monasticism, or at least my small understanding of it, the keeping of the holy hours, a life of work and of worship that flows according to a plan all its own, a space where time didn't so much move forward inexorably as in a cycle, over and over again, waking and witnessing and sleeping in spurts, moving not through things, but in them. And I know I make it sound far more lovely and less desperate than it really was. Such is the way of recounting. And let me be clear, neither monasticism nor motherhood was never meant to be easy. There is a beautiful, if honestly painfully boring, documentary I watched in those years called Into Great Silence. I swear to you, it is a 3-hour documentary with very little, if any, dialogue, which follows the lives and the works of Carthusian monks in a monastery in the French Alps as they just do their lives. The everyday tasks of being in community together. Now, the Carthusian rule is considered one of the very strictest ways of life in Christendom. It includes, among other things, a vow of near complete silence. And so, as the title suggests, it is a film about silence. I swear to you, no talking, just chanting. And like bird song in the distance and the shuffling of feet on very old stairwells. It might not be your cup of tea, so perhaps my short summary will suffice. For 10 minutes or more, we watch in silence as an old man with a hoe in hand digs through the snow to plant this spring's bulbs. A young man with the shaved head and the order's cowled robe strains with a heavy axe, chopping firewood to keep his brothers warm. He sits in a doorway to eat a simple lunch before resuming his work, and the camera just follows them. While they make their clothes, and they wash their bowls, and they eat their meals, they occasionally exchange the smiles reserved only for the dearest of friends, and to my great delight, you watch them as they exchange the backwards glances of frenemies at best. It's fabulous. And they pray. For hours they pray, with words and song and silence, but most of all, they pray with their work, with their labor, infusing it all with this supplication for themselves to be better, for one another to be steady and strong, and for the whole world around us to be, maybe a little bit better too, more aligned with what the God they carry in their hearts meant for it, that the world might be perhaps just a little less awful anyway. Now, life for those monks in the far-off French Alps, within their ancient way of life and their days full of distant prayers, it is obviously far removed from our lives. So different, one could be forgiven for thinking it hardly bears reflection on a day like today, when the headlines are not faraway concepts, nor dust motes moving without consequence in still alpine air. No, the headlines are heartbreaking and life-altering realities that strike at the heart of our lives and our communities and our relationships. People are dying here. People have measles here. And yet the silence I saw among those brothers serves a larger purpose. And the labor of their hands is made holy by the fact that they do it for one another, for the chance at making something that is broken just a little bit more whole again, for the hope in their theology that the world as it is and the world as it should be could come just inches closer together. There's a beautiful song by the great singer Alison Krauss and her band Union Station, which says, "Take my life and let it be a living prayer, my God, to thee." I was one among the many clergy and leaders who were present in Minneapolis in January when a call went out for people of faith to come to that city and to bear witness to what was happening in those streets, our streets, in these our days. Ever since coming home from Minneapolis, where I was deep behind the scenes holding 2 phones and a laptop, somehow trying to carry all of this underneath the giant parka someone loaned me that could withstand the negative 15-degree temperatures we faced. Somehow, behind the scenes, organizing communications for the clergy and the leaders and resisting the armed ICE occupation all around us, I was still singing that lyric silently like a mantra to myself: "Take my life and let it be a living prayer, my God, to thee." Now, I don't want you to get hung up on the word God and start tuning me out if that isn't your theology, though I expect this is a more open-hearted place than that. What I'm saying is not about believing or not believing. You are fully capable of translating one theology into another. The prayer on your lips may not be about transcendence, but what I am saying is that a living prayer is exponentially more powerful than a prayer which is quickly spoken and forgotten. And I have found moments and seasons in my life when, of necessity, the very living of my days became a prayer. The birth of my children was one of them. Our organizing in Minneapolis, in which I was not in charge but called to be present, was another. The sheer labor and responsiveness I have known in the midst of crisis, even profound grief, that is another. While it's not the words that hold the prayer in times like these, it is the work of the moment which is given to us. And it is not me that sets the schedule of my very most important things for my very most important self, but something else that is formed only in relationship to the people and the world around me. Now, there's a theologian, his name is Chris Owen. He's also an organizational thinker, and he writes in one of my very favorite journals of theological thought, because I'm a nerd and I have a favorite journal of theological thought. And he wrote recently that so many of us live our lives as if we are motorboat people in a motorboat world. You point the tiller in the direction that you yourself have determined you would like to go. You hit the ignition and you head that way, barriers be damned. No matter what the weather says, no matter what the water looks like or the time of day or the season, you set your direction and you proceed. Motorboat people in a motorboat world do not need to busy themselves with the slow work of relationship. As he says, motorboat people don't discern, we decide. After all, who needs to pay attention to the wind when you are self-propelled? And all of it, all of our actions, all of our decisions, even our opinions, point round to the desperately held idea of a fully autonomous self. Now, I confess, I did choose this particular analogy because I have only been on 2 sailboats in my entire life, and both of them were here in Annapolis. And so the question becomes, what does it feel like to live in a sailboat world? To be a sailboat person, even if only for a season. You see, in a sailboat world, being in relationship is the only way you get anywhere. In his words, in a sailboat world, being in relationship is the fundamental category of selfhood. It is self, and it is season, and it is wind, and it is waves. It is monk, and garden, and rake, and dirt, and the ringing of the chapel bells calling out the hours. It is child, and parent, and diaper, and food. It is neighbors, and whistles, and black cars creeping the frozen streets. It is momentary safety and hunger after a long day, and the rent that comes due at the end of the month, even if you are too afraid to leave your home and go to work. In a sailboat world, it is never just you or me. Sailboat world, time and space thicker than air, moving on each other's rhythm instead of just my own. Because every burp and every gurgle back when I was a new parent was a prayer, an act of faith, the knowledge that this life, however fragile, was a manifestation of deep love. Because every sermon I attempt to preach now is not just my desire to express my opinions in front of all of you, but a deep and abiding prayer to God in heaven and everything that is holy in this world and above it, that these days can be reasonably safe, not just for my now grown teenage girl and her almost grown little brother, but for all those currently cowering under the bombs that fly indiscriminately from the pens of powerful men. Because resistance works when we know that we are not resisting alone. And because if a Savior ever comes back, it will not be an individual, but a community who rises up together from these streets to bring saving power to our days. Because showing up here on Sunday morning, it is in fact actually about way more than whether or not this sermon, or indeed any of John's sermons, is technically a good sermon, although clearly they all shine. In fact, showing up here on Sunday morning is no exchange of goods and services at all. It is not about whether your programs are perfect or the coffee is always hot and exactly how you like it, right on time. Indeed, every subtle and bold act of resistance and sustenance you undertake here in this congregation or in your workplaces or in the world is a prayer that all of us can be transformed into more peaceful, more gentle, and more honest versions of ourselves. Now, I personally, at this time in my life, I serve in a very tactical, very detailed, none too jazzy institutional role at the Unitarian Universalist Association. And I do that because I know that the association we are a part of, which weaves the connections between us and Unitarian Universalists around the world, this association I work for holds the heart of the faith so that you in this congregation can hold the line against white Christian nationalism, religious imperialism, and every force that threatens the values we hold dear. I do that institutional, detailed work that weaves the fabric of our larger faith so that we are not just motorboats zooming off in all directions, in the power of our resistance reduced by our fierce individuality into irrelevancy. Even the most mundane parts of my work serve the relational network that connects us, and it was always meant to be a prayer. And so the question for the lawyer and for the accountant and the dancer and the artist and the teacher and the student, the gardener, the protester, and every single one of us is simply this: what sanctifying prayer is on your lips while you do whatever it is you are called to do right now? And when you acknowledge that prayer, when you lift it up intentionally, how might it change the lived experience of your days, yes, even in the middle of 1,000 crises? When you turn off the motorboat and you wait for the wind of relationship to lead you in discernment, for what do you pray? For what reason do you bend your back to meet the labor at hand? From whence do you gain the strength to submit yourself to the task, even when you cannot control its outcome? What is the prayer that lies just beneath the flowing current of your everyday life? And how clearly is it connected to the deeply lived prayers of every single soul around you? In ways large and small, surprising and mundane, may our work be uplifted by our interdependence. May our moments be so holy they slow us down long enough to bear witness. And may our prayers be answered to such a degree that we can perceive the blessing over the motorboat noise zooming in and out of our being, today and every day.